believe you're explaining something to me about at a different time about how based on the rate that you feed your starter, the starter will after 3 to 7 days or whatever will kind of adapt to that feeding schedule. It like almost sounded a little spooky to me, where you were like, it's like, how is it learning? It's like,
Well, it's with these microorganisms, their life cycle is very basic. It is really survival of the fittest, and they're in their genetic code, they want to survive, and they will do everything that they can to survive, and that includes even learning when they're going to be fed. So this is why it's important for people who want to get serious about doing their sourdough starters. Is the first thing is make sure you feed it more or less at the same time every day.
Right.
And because it'll get used to, the yeast will know, okay, I have 24 hours to eat this. And so I'm going to make sure that, I develop, my yeast cells are going to be able to consume this within 24 hours. And I know that there's more coming after that. Right. And it's not like 24 hours on the nose. You can give or take an hour on each end.
Sure.
But it knows that it doesn't need to hurry up. It knows that it needs to stretch it before it gets more. And so the same thing will happen if I feed it every 12 hours, it'll adapt to that, and so on and so forth. But very important to really realize that, when we're talking about a starter like this with wild yeast, it's almost more important to talk about the lactic acid bacteria and the acetic acid bacteria that live in there. And the reason for this is because they outnumber the yeast cells 100 to 1. So if you want to talk about, the influence of flavor in the final product, it's not the yeast. It is the mixture of lactic acid bacteria and acetic acid bacteria that exist in there that influence, because there's a lot more varieties of those. When we talk about yeast in a sourdough starter, the dominant yeast strain is called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's exactly the same type of yeast that you get the instant yeast. It's Saccharomyces. That's what it is. It's just in a purified form. What you find in your sourdough starter is about 70 to 80% that. It might be one or two more different strains of yeast, but the dominant one is that one. So it doesn't really contribute that much complexity. It contributes some flavor and so on and so forth. But the other microorganisms, the lactic acid and acetic acid, there are hundreds of varieties of that. And that is what creates a unique sourdough starter for each person. Like if you and your wife had a sourdough starter and you kept it in a different room in your house, it will eventually be like, if it starts the same and you split it up, because of the different environment it's in, it's going to become unique to you guys, to each place where it is. Now, whatever exists on the wheat kernel in the field where the wheat is harvested from, that whatever is the yeast and the bacteria that is covering and coating that wheat granule is going to have the most influence on how your final bread tastes. But to a moderate degree, it's how you feed it. If you feed it with your hands, what's in the air in your bakery or in your kitchen, that does have an influence on it. And that is what makes every sourdough starter as unique as possible.
Kind of got that. I want to, no, I mean, this is great information. I think everybody's going to find a lot of value in this. There's a lot of guys, a lot more than I think we think, that are into this thing. And like, I mean, hearing you talk like in an unfiltered way definitely gives them, a lot to like, study and I think a better understanding overall, and to gain, a real understanding. So you were talking about these two bacteriums. Can you say the names of them again?
Yeah, so the shortened abbreviation is LAB, L-A-B, which is lactic acid bacteria.
Okay. Bacterium.
And then acetic, which is like acetic acid, ACETIC acid bacteria, which is, if I think of the flavor profile of each one, acetic acid bacteria is very like vinegary. So, and that's exactly what you would find in a balsamic vinegar. That's the bacteria that is used in that environment. And lactic acid bacteria is more of an acidity, like what you would find in like dairy, like yogurt, sour cream, and so forth. So it's a more mellow acid taste that you have there. So there's lactic acid bacteria prefers to be in warmer temperatures, and acetic acid bacteria prefers cooler temperatures.
Okay.
So this is how you this is how you can influence the outcome of the flavor of your pizza dough or your bread, which is like, where do you store your sourdough starter? In a warmer area, you're going to, have a, stronger presence of lactic acid bacteria. In colder, you're going to have a stronger presence of acetic acid bacteria. So, in San Francisco, maybe you like really acidic bread, like because the bread there is like very acidic. Well, then maybe you keep it in a colder temperature. It really is up to you what your flavor profile is that you want. Now, I personally don't like super sour sourdough starters. So I like to use I keep mine in a wine fridge, which I set to 55 degrees.
Yeah, I've been reading things about that. I think from you, probably from you.
Right. So I keep it there, which is not too cold. It's not too warm. So I have a good mix of both of them. But the other part is that I don't wait too long after I mix it to mix it into my dough. Like if I feed my sourdough starter, let's say at 7 o'clock in the morning, by 11 or so, I'm already mixing it into a dough, right? If I let that go further, then it's going to become more and more acidic.
So it's almost similar to like, in Chad Robertson's book, he's got like his mature starter that he mixes in, and then I think he calls out a Levain, and similar to that almost.
Right.
Which is
it's the same thing. It's different names.
Yeah. It's obviously an old school thing that he learned from France somewhere.
Right.
I mean, he studied.
But that is actually, I would say it's a more correct term, because sourdough is a very American thing. And it's called Levain, which means, like, literally translated as leaven, which is, it's a leavener. If you go and have bread in France, they don't like that sourdough profile. I mean, it's almost like the bread is bad once it gets that sour. But you go to San Francisco and they've really like these really sour bread. So it's just a matter of personal preference. And sourdough is it's very colloquial. It's more like bakery vernacular, where we're calling it the starter the same thing as we're calling the bread, right? So it's sourdough, and then this is sourdough bread.
I hate the word personally. That's why I said Levain. Right. But because everybody that I try to explain about what I'm doing with, pre-ferments or wild yeast or whatever you want to call it, because a lot of people don't understand, like on the street, like what Levain is, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're doing sourdough," and I'm like, yeah, but I don't like that word.
But not really.
It implies that my bread or my pizza is sour, which is not the flavor profile.
It's not what you're going for.
Right. No, correct. Right. So, when do you see what? Do you see what like a lot of bakeries? Do you see them like more going towards, like, is there guys that kind of go like 100% to cold fermentation and other guys 100% warm, or is it more a mix between the two? I know that, like, when I started traveling around for pizza many years ago, the way that they were telling me things like, when I went to Naples, they were like, oh, in order to be real Napoletan pizza, you can never put the dough in the fridge. It has to be in a wood thing, and you have to use buffalo mozzarella, because that's the only real mozzarella. Fior di latte is not allowed to be called mozzarella by law. Now all that has changed. Now if you go to like Neapolitan VPN or one of these classes, they're saying use plastic trays, 100% cold fermentation. Fior di latte is fine. Is there things like that in bread, and is there kind of like, what are the pros and cons to like a cold fermentation during a worm fermentation? Like,
well, I'm pro cold fermentation.
Okay.
In bread and in pizza, because the first thing is that if you are able to cold ferment, you're going to be able to have a life, and this means that you're not subject to whatever room temperature you have, which will fluctuate your dough. It means that sometimes you might be having to mix dough at midnight so that it's ready the next day. If you have cold fermentation, you control the yeasts. And so that allows you to plan ahead. It allows you to have dough that is manageable, right? In the realm of bread, if I cold ferment a dough, it's really interesting. It bakes differently, but really nicely. Like, it's first and foremost, it's easier to score, to make the cut on a cold dough than on a soft, bubbly, gassy dough.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
So you get a cleaner cut. I mean, it's partially aesthetic, the whole, getting the clean cut. But it also means,
yeah. Go ahead.
Right.
Sorry.
But what matters is, like, if I'm getting a clean cut, why do I score dough? I score it because I'm trying to give the steam a controlled exit path, right? Instead of letting the dough just like expand and rip apart, I'm telling, the steam, this is where you're going to exit through, and, we're going to have a nice loaf of bread. With pizza dough, it's the same thing. You're able to control that fermentation, but also because the yeast has a longer time to work on the dough, even though it's slowed down, and the bacteria in there too, you're going to have a lot more sugar breakdown in the starches, and you're going to have a better flavor, and you're going to have a better color in your dough. If you did a side-by-side on, like, these Neapolitan guys that say, you have to, you shouldn't refrigerate it, is because when they started making it, there were probably no refrigerators, or they didn't have the capacity to store it. So then it turns into a law, right? Or a rule.
Right.
Well, because we did it like this, then everybody has to do it like that. But it's more of a circumstantial situation. And so what do? Then they have to, in the summer, this was crazy. Like, some of these guys, what they were doing is, instead of adjusting the amount of yeast, they were adding more salt during the summer.
Oh.
I'm like, but why are you doing that? You're changing the flavor of your dough. Adjust the yeast. Don't adjust the salt. Keep the salt the same, and change the amount of yeast. Just put less yeast in it in the summer because it's hotter, and keep the salt the same, because then your pizza is going to be different 365 days of a year. Right. If I go to Sorbillo in the summer, it's going to taste one way. If I go there in the winter, it's going to taste differently because of I'm changing the salt. That makes absolutely no sense to me. So please keep it at 2%. That's the golden rule. If anybody takes anything out of this conversation you and I are having, 2% salt based on the flour. That's the perfect amount of salt to add to any dough, whether it be pizza, sourdough, baguettes, you name it. That is the perfect amount to add. And the yeast is what you can vary.
Oh, yeah.